Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. Our current session focuses on ethnic varieties as social correlates. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand what do we mean by ethnic varieties and how do they operate as social correlates or variables. Well, my dear students, it may appear that the association of language ethnic group affiliation is one of the most obvious areas that has been researched into language and culture relationships. When it comes to, generally speaking, when lay people would talk about language choices, when they would talk about language and identity, they would always say this is more ethnic, it is based on ethnicity. This is a general belief, and this is also generally believed that it is explored a lot in sociolinguistics. Practically, when we come to the global picture, out of the approximately 6,000 languages that are used across the world, they are strongly associated with one or the other ethno-cultural group. However, what is interesting is that this initial transparency of the idea that every language almost is linked to or is owned by, possessed by, or is associated with a particular ethnic group, this idea, is betrayed by the fact that language is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition. We need to understand this. It is neither necessary nor a sufficient condition for what? For ethnic group membership. According to Fishman, to be members of an ethnic group, language is not necessarily the criteria. To be members of an ethnic group, again, this is not, even if it is one of the criteria, this is not necessarily sufficient criteria. There would be other factors that would be involved in giving you or in allowing you to be a member of a particular ethnic class. For example, what are the other factors? For example, socio-cultural borders, for example, the linguistic boundaries, for example, the cultural aspects of all that. And in all this context, when we look at all this, we would realize that the linguistic boundaries, which language would be used by whom, in which area, by which kind of ethnic group, etc., like social boundaries, these are all also very negotiable, they keep on getting adjusted, they are very fluid. They are defined more on the basis of socio-political and ideological considerations as compared to the basic structural linguistic basis. So, this particular kind of structure of this particular kind of language is going to be used by this particular kind of ethnic group or class or social class. This is not how it operates. The factors that determine that are not linguistic or structural from the point of view of language. They are more like social and political. Politically, dealing with the issues of power, these choices of languages are made. Even, the basic idea of what is a language and what is a dialect, and I hope you know what is a language and what is a dialect, one being more standardized, the other being non-standardized, one being present in both the spoken and the written forms, the other being present only in the spoken form, etc. When we consider these two ideas of language and dialect, even this division of language is very, very political, and the issues of power and the issues of prestige and the issues of identities of groups, they are attached with it. Here I would give you the example of Sino-Tibetan language varieties such as Cantonese and Mandarin languages. These are the dialects of Chinese, and though they mutually are not, intelligible for people, they do not understand them much, but they coexist in the same ethnic context. In contrast to this, I would like you to look at the case of, Norwegian and Swedish context, where there are different languages, Norwegian and Swedish, that are used, though the speakers, they are able to understand each other. So, this is how languages and dialects are separated or they are united in terms of political powers associated with them. And as I have said in the case of Chinese and then in the Swedish case, the former case is an overarching cultural kind of unity that is reflected through these language, typologies or varieties that are chosen. Whereas in the latter case, it's more like national borders. The Swedish border, for example, would be separated from the Norwegian border because it is like more state, nation or state being identified with in terms of its ideology or in terms of its political power. So, though the languages match so much that they seem to be like same language and people understand each other very easily, they are considered to be different languages, and they are actually efforts are made to keep them separate languages. So the socio-political struggles about language involve various factors, and this happens all across the globe. For example, Afrikaans in South Africa, French and English in Canada, how they are, kind of creating different kinds of identities of different groups of people. African American English, that is so-called Ebonics in the United States, that creates a certain kind of ethnic identity for a certain social group. These choices of language with reference to ethnicity, they are not about language per se. They are not about the structure of the language, the linguistic construct itself. No, they are not. They are more about the issues of identity, the issues of power, the issues of ideology, and thus they are more political, I would say, than what we may call generally, ethnic. So, when it comes to the ethnic affiliations of people to groups, they can be defined in certain ways. It is often difficult to separate ethnicity from other social factors or other historical backgrounds, such as social class, region, for that matter, other socio-cultural variables that exist in any particular society. As an example, I would say the variety that is labeled as Irish English. This again is more like a political factor to give this particular kind of identity to people in Ireland, and in kind of giving them their own space in the British Isles. In the same way, in African American English context, if we look at the United States, it is strongly linked to the demographic racial strategies of language use, where certain other categories of social status of these, what I would call certain races of people, that they use this African American English to create their identity in the society. Inevitably, ethnicity interacts with a wide range of other social variables. It does not operate separately. In collaboration with other correlates in the social context, it shapes the language choices that are made. People may have multiple ethnicities, and this is one of the significant issues when it comes to ethnicity as a variable. So when we are defining a kind of ethnic group, then from the sociolinguistic perspectives, we need to follow the following parameters. Origin that precedes or are external to the state. Where do people belong to beyond that state thing? Group membership that is involuntary. Involuntarily people, are members of certain groups beyond their choice. Ancestral traditions that are rooted in a shared kind of, what we may call a sense of peoplehood. Distinctive values or orientations or behavioral patterns that are associated with a certain group of people when it comes to linguistic choices. And above all, the influence of the group on the lives of its members. Being a member of an ethnic group would determine my language choices as, as an individual. So, all I would conclude with is that ethnic varieties are very important social correlates, and they play an important role in shaping the language of people being members of different ethnic communities.